is over. Okay, well, thanks everyone for joining. This is our first California Estuary Monitoring Work Group meeting of the year. We are excited for you to be here. If you're just joining, if you can drop your name and your affiliation into the chat, that would be great. We've got a pretty full agenda, but we have lots of room at the end for some discussion. So if we have some agenda items that get a lot of discussion, I'll probably let us go a little bit past time. But high level view here, I just like to start these meetings with kind of a background of who we are, because we are still recruiting new people, and then also what we talked about in our last December 13th quarterly meeting. We have 2 work items that we are working on right now as a work group, and so I'm going to give an update on each of those. Kat Beheshti is going to give an update on work item number 2. Then we're going to talk about updates from our Tiburon workshop that we hosted last fall. Julie and I have been starting to work on a manuscript that's come out of that workshop, and so we would like to share about that and recruit. Then we've got 2 big presentations, which is the bulk of our meeting today. One presentation on the Los Cerritos Wetland Restoration Project, and then another presentation on providing public comment on estuarine criteria for 30 by 30. And then we'll end today with a general discussion on if you are monitoring, if you would like to share any spring updates as we roll into another field season. I know a lot of what's going on, so if you're still on the line, I'll probably call you out and make you say a few things. We're a small group here, so I think this is just a good time as we kind of roll into this new year to share what people are doing out in the field. So with that, we'll just jump right in. Like always, this is a forum for discussion, so please drop things into the chat. And then, of course, you can raise your hand and interrupt as well. So because we're still fairly new, this is our 4th meeting. I do just like to remind people of who we are. So we are the California Estuary Monitoring Work Group. We live underneath the California Water Quality Monitoring Council, which was established in 2006. The Water Quality Monitoring Council it really has 2 major goals. First goal, to improve coordination of water quality monitoring programs in California. And then its second goal is to make information more accessible to agencies and the public via web portals. So right now, if you've been on other work group calls, one of the main goals that the council is working on is we are overhauling all of the work group websites. And so the CEMW website is in the queue. We've created a draft of it, but we are next for the overhaul. So it should be coming live here, hopefully soon in the next few months. And then probably for our future work group meetings, we'll brainstorm ways to make our website even more accessible and available and useful to the public. So the CEMW has a fun history. But we rebooted, we went dormant for a little bit, but we rebooted this past year, hosting our first meeting in March. So this is officially our 4th meeting. So we are at 1 year old since our reboot and our reinvigoration. So that is exciting. One of the main reasons we got our group back together in 2023 was because we realized that there are a lot of statewide and regional efforts that are ongoing, all focused on assessing function and condition in estuaries all across the state. So this work group's main goal is really to provide a forum for communication and coordination of all of these regional statewide efforts. So we really like to provide a space for presentations and discussions on all the efforts that relate to monitoring and assessing function and condition within the state. Another big goal is we really want to make sure that in these discussions, we're sharing resources and efforts that are ongoing, sharing tools, as well as increasing our standardization among all of our groups when it comes to tool building and assessments and monitoring, and really identifying common needs. And so you'll see that our first 2 work items that we've been spinning up really focus on identifying the needs of this community and moving forward to make sure we're all on the same page. We do have a charter which outlines our mission, which you can check out on our website, and then pending our new upcoming website. But overall, our main mission is to advance the science and practice of monitoring and assessment in California and to improve coordination and information sharing among all these efforts, like I just said. And I'll just emphasize again that these work groups are really here to provide a forum for coordination and technical exchanges. So all are welcome. We try to make all of these resources publicly available, and we're really trying to move towards, building a common vision for the use of tools and science-based information to support decision making. There are 3 co-chairs. All of us are online here. Marissa, Pike, and myself. We represent from 3 different sectors. So Pike works for the Ocean Protection Council. Marissa represents the Wiyot tribe, and then I'm here down at the Southern California Coastal Water Research Project. So as always, you can reach out to us with anything. So I think I've done that now for every single meeting. So I think that'll be it on my briefing of the Water Quality Monitoring Council. But these slides will live online, and if you have questions, you can always just let me know. And there's way more knowledgeable people on here. So if you've got like actual questions about how this all came to be, you got Christina Toms on here that could geek out probably about some water board stuff. But we now will move forward with what we've been doing here at CEMW. So I want to give kind of an overview of what we had at our last meeting in case you want to check out the meeting notes. 2 big things happened in December. We really focused our meeting around trying to highlight and access projects that are happening in the North Coast. So as you might imagine, CEMW has strong voices from Southern California as well as the Bay Area, and we're really trying to make sure we have statewide representation. So we heard from 3 individuals about North Coast monitoring projects. We heard from Darren at Cal Trout, Marissa from the Wiyot tribe, and then Jennifer also from the Humboldt Waterkeeper. And I just wanted to throw up their information here again. The slides are all available on our website. And so you can check out or reach out to them if you have any questions. But they really painted a nice vision of what's going on in our further North Coast, so north of San Francisco Bay. A lot of great efforts that we're hoping that can work with all the other regional efforts that are happening elsewhere across the state. We also had a presentation from Eric Stein and Marvia Clemens representing a spin-up of the Wetland Recovery Project Regional Monitoring Program. This is a EPA-funded grant that is working to develop a regional monitoring program within Southern California. The main goal of this program is to develop comparable approaches for wetland monitoring and to work to incorporate these into permit and funding required monitoring programs. This presentation really focused on developing a Sentinel site network within Southern California. So I'm sure we'll hear from this project as it continues to progress. But if this speaks to any of you, feel free to reach out to them, and their slides are also available on the website. Are there any questions from past meetings or past groups? Or not groups, sorry, I was reading the chat, but just past questions. Oh, thanks, Christina, for putting that into the chat. That's good. Okay, so now we'll turn to what we are currently working on within CEMW. So we've got 2 main work items that we voted on last year to start working on. These items have formed 2 subcommittees. So if you want to join any of these subcommittees, just let us know. They are chaired by these 2 individuals. So Rosemary is leading up our first work item, which is to create a clearinghouse or website of existing monitoring programs. And then Kat is leading up our second work item, which is to develop matrices that relate questions to indicators and monitoring approaches. And so I'll give a background on this first work item, and where we're at and where we're hoping to go. And then Kat's going to give you an update from the second work item. So this first work item, what we're trying to do, our main goal is to compile and synthesize monitoring information, hopefully into an easily accessible and digestible format. So we kind of laid out where we want to go. We are currently in step 1, which is to create some type of table with all the monitoring information across the state. So we have actually moved on to step 2, which is we've passed this table across the CEMW listserv as well as other partners to start to collect this information. Our overarching goal is then to compile this so it's can be displayed on our website in both a map and tabular format. And so we're not quite there yet. So if you haven't seen this, we have a Google Doc that we've been passing around to start to collect all of this monitoring information. Either Pike or Marissa, if you guys could drop that link into the chat, that'd be great. We've gotten, I think this is all the information that we have. So we still have a long way to go. And so I want to pause here and just have a brief conversation about a few different things. One, where else should we be distributing this list? So it's come out across the CEMW listserv. We really need your help and we really need you to fill it out. And I'm guilty of this. I have not filled out this Google Doc yet. So that's on me. Neither has the EMP8 program, which is monitoring like 20 estuaries. So we need to fill this out. I listed, like how can we better like incentivize groups to fill it out? And then my third kind of question here is I've gotten some feedback from people that they used to monitor and now that monitoring has stopped. And if there's somewhere in this form that we also could log that. So if people have comments or questions or want to answer any of those questions, that would be great and helpful.
Jen, you could send it out through the other work group listservs as one option to the CWW and the coastal one, or if it even exists.
Oh, the beaches one?
Yeah, beaches and coastlines.
Yeah.
You could ask Nick to send it out through the Monitoring Council's listserv as well, which is different than ours.
That's a good idea.
And then if I go just say if there are actual programs that you know of that have not filled it out, you can reach out them directly and pester them.
Yeah, does anyone see any glaring holes that are missing? Besides, Kevin, all your stuff is missing.
Well, yeah, my stuff is definitely not there.
Can I ask a question about level of detail that you want?
Yeah.
Do you want like every single thing we monitor on a separate line? Or I got lazy and just put like various, but I wasn't sure level of detail you wanted.
Yeah, that's a good question. So if you scroll here, let me see if I can should be able to actually pull this up and share it so we can look at it. Can you all see my Safari, my browser?
Yeah.
Okay. So you can we are asking for you to check whether or not the different indicators that you are monitoring. And one of the reasons we are doing this is because we're hoping to link this to the next work item that we've been working on too. But right now, we just want to get I would say, a crude estimate of where in the state is there consistent monitoring. And we have different categories here for both long-term and short-term and a special study, which I think is great. And this will help put it on the map. But this is about the level of detail that we're looking for in terms of indicators and things like that. Did that answer your question?
Yes, perfect. Thank you.
Yeah.
Jan, I'd also say you could reach out to state parks because they have their scientific collection permits. So they should know where people are collecting data in their estuaries. In theory, there's also the CDFW scientific collection permits. Like Humboldt Bay is not on here. I know somebody's collecting data in Humboldt Bay. There, I mean, it has to be happening. So, yeah,
Okay.
I will.
I'm also not seeing. Oh, sorry. Go for it, Kevin.
Oh, I was just gonna say I can actually do this now, Jen, because I forgot to do it, and I can start putting stuff in there.
Yeah, I can too.
Maybe also noting, I see the Oregon State work, but there should also be some monitoring from the Tijuana NER that I am not seeing on here, or as well as their work at Los Penasquitos. So either them or the Los Penasquitos Lagoon Foundation might be worth reaching out to.
Yeah, I think we're missing the NERS. We have the NEP, but there's some other NEPs that we should reach out to as well.
So Jane, to your question about things that are maybe not currently collecting data, that was when I had reached out to some of my colleagues. They had come back with a few that maybe had like died during COVID type of thing. And so I guess my question would be a little bit like, I think you got at this earlier, but like if our intention is to create like a place where people would be able to go and like find sources of long-term data, and just generally, I feel like it would be good to include those that maybe aren't currently active but could potentially become active again, like funding dependent or like capacity dependent. But then if the goal is more like who's active now, like here's a list of the like people actively doing work, then maybe that's not as important to include those. So I could see it going either way depending on what our particular intention is with this.
Do anyone have thoughts on that?
I have a thought, I guess I'll share since I'm
Yeah.
kind of off mute, which is just that I think that like if it feels like it may be the most useful incarnation would be like a way for people to find their way to long-term data sets, even if they're not like completely to the present day. But that of course then is like kind of opens a can of worms. So it's not just things that like maybe sunsetted in 2020, then you're sort of like opening yourself up to a lot of older stuff too. So I don't know, I could go either way.
I was thinking we could add another column that allows you to say like active or not, right? It's like a yes or no. That would help with that. As
Yeah.
well. Where we like really focus on making sure we're getting the data for the active, but if we get some other stuff, that's fine.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. And I think Chris put in the chat maybe having like a column that would be like, the span of time over which it's been. So not just the start date, but if it's inactive, then the end date or the date of last collection or something.
For folks who are interested, the Fish and Fish Habitat Working Group of the San Francisco Estuary Wetlands Regional Monitoring Program has developed a similar compilation of all of the fish monitoring efforts that have ever been implemented in the lower estuary. It was a really big effort. It was a lot of work to pull that together. And they actually started to extract some data from it, primarily what types of gear and equipment were used and where they were used and when they were used. And that really helped us inform our SOP for fish monitoring for the WRMP. So if folks are interested in seeing that and getting some ideas about how they handled this, challenge of, wrapping your arms around existing monitoring efforts and current monitoring efforts, I'm happy to get you in touch with it's basically Levi Lewis at UC Davis and Allie Weber Stover at National Marine Fisheries Service who led that effort.
Wow.
That'd be great. Is that available too? Is that fish data available? Like
So yeah, not all of the data, because there's so many different metrics, right? Like abundance.
I didn't mean the data, sorry, but like who's collect like this type of information.
Yeah. So that's all. It's in a Google database. I don't, I I could throw the link into the chat, but I don't know if it's in a format. I don't know if Allie and Levi are happy with how cleaned up it is yet. But let me check with them, and maybe in the notes for this meeting, we can include a link to that if they're happy with it. Like we've been using it in the WRMP, but I don't know if it would make them anxious to share it more broadly without, putting some caveats in there or something like that.
That makes sense.
But I'm sure we can get it in the notes. We'll just throw in whatever caveats we need, and then people can take a look.
Any other comments on this? I'm trying to get everything that's in the chat too. Yeah, Nick, I will personally go to Dr. Christine Whitcraft's house and make her fill this sheet out.
Jan, this is Dana. Can I ask a question? Are you all looking for documenting monitoring in terms of like pH, ocean acidification at all? I didn't see that as one of the columns.
That would go under like continuous water quality data. So like
Okay,
pH, temperature, salinity, DO. This is kind of like a catch-all category for sure.
gotcha. Thank you.
Hey, Jan, I had the same question, but about HABs. Would that be under, would you imagine this under one of the clicks here?
Yeah, what do we want to do? We could add HABs. There's phytoplankton and chlorophyll here, which you could throw it under potentially. I don't know,
Yeah.
that doesn't really fit though. We could add a macroalgae column too,
I can see that.
which does that people have thoughts on what you would rather? I could do macroalgae / HABs.
Mm,
No?
nope, I don't think you should do that one.
Okay.
No.
Chris says yay to macroalgae.
Yeah, I would just do them separate, not together.
Do we have columns for like water levels, suspended sediment, salinity?
So we have sediment properties here, and then like with continuous water quality, so that could include all of your water quality stuff. What was the other thing you just said? Water level could go under that too.
Yeah, water levels and suspended sediments and salinity. So salinity definitely falls under continuous, water quality, but the actual elevations, I think we may want to call that out. And then suspended sediment being pretty different from sediment properties. Or maybe suspended sediment / turbidity.
Great. Okay, so I will make some edits to this and send this back around, and I will target some of these other groups as well. But I really appreciate the feedback, and I would appreciate if you guys send this around too. I think that this could be a really great effort.
No, that's great, baby.
Oh,
Oops.
Elijah, you aren't muted.
Oh, sorry.
No, you're good. I think that this is going to be what we're envisioning is pulling this into some type of like Shiny app or visualization where it would be the forefront of our CMW website where people could navigate around and be able to see where both monitoring is happening, but also who to potentially collaborate with in those areas as well. Okay.
So Nick, I kind of threw state parks in there. Is there a way to contact state parks and find out where people are doing research in your estuaries with your permits? Is it organized?
Theoretically, there should be, whether that's in a spreadsheet where I can, do a control find for estuary is maybe a bit of a different question, but there is a general like research at parks.ca.gov. If you type in like our general scientific collecting website, it might make sense to kind of put in a request there, then it'll go to the folks that actually manage that. And very likely will end up back on my desk, but that might be like the right channel to route that request. And I know that we're working on a project right now to modernize kind of the infrastructure for the scientific collecting permit program. So it may be a fortunate time to put a request like that in while we're thinking about how to monitor, update this program for these kinds of questions. So I'd say like, yeah, give it a shot. And if not, maybe I can figure out something on the back end, but that would be my recommendation. I can find the email address if y'all need it while we go through this meeting.
Yeah,
Thanks.
that'd be great. Okay, I'm gonna turn it to Kat to talk about work item number 2.
Okay, thanks, Jan.
Baby too. That's good.
Yeah, she just woke up, so hopefully she's quiet. All right, so like Jan said, her and I are taking the lead on this work item number 2 to develop these matrices that relate to questions to indicators and monitoring approaches. And the first step that we developed after a separate meeting with the work group that's leading this effort and contributing to it was to develop a set of slides or conceptual models depicting the broad understanding and agreement on estuarine health, function, services, and stressors. So that's the step we're at right now. That will then feed into the development of programmatic guiding questions for statewide estuarine monitoring. And then we'll move on to identify a subset of indicators that can be used to answer those specific questions. And so first, from those subgroup meetings, it was agreed that we need to all have a consensus and understanding about what a healthy estuary is. And so that is where these slides are supposed to kind of represent that agreement about what we consider a healthy systems. And I would just say that what we were thinking is that, ideally this slide deck would be something that all of us for relevant talks could have at the front of our presentations to really help communicate and help demonstrate that we are all collaborating and coordinating, and that we are all part of this statewide monitoring efforts to evaluate the health of our estuaries. And so that's the goal of that first step. And so we're happy to bring on more folks into the subgroup to help contribute to the development of those slides and the questions and the indicators. So if you're interested, please reach out to either Jan or myself, and we'll just give you a quick preview of what those slides look like next. Jan, you want to go to the next slide? So, we start by just talking about what systems or what habitats to expect and species to expect in these systems next. And then we identify some of the stressors that affect many of these different habitats. And then next, and then we go into this, what is a healthy estuary? And what we're developing right now that I just haven't had time to polish to a shareable point yet is developing the conceptual model, which we refined and got great feedback at our last subgroup meeting. And so that's where we're at now. And then hopefully those slides will be finished in the next month. And so if you're interested in contributing or joining our work group, like I said, shoot Jan or I email and we'll get you on board and caught up.
Yeah, are there kind of any questions? Let me know if you all want to join. Like Kat said, we're working on some more like conceptual graphics right now that really help depict of answering this question, what is a healthy estuary? We really, as a group, thought, this is what we have to answer first in order to actually start to think about like what are our main guiding questions across the state. Yeah, so Bobby, I see in the chat you're asking, what is the landing place for this? Right now, this would be a CEMW product, and it would be available for anyone to use. So it would exist on our website, and we would encourage people to use it so that we're all have the same language when we're talking about these systems. We're still a ways away because we're still trying to workshop this, and so once our subcommittee has come up with the slides, we'll present them back to the overarching CEMW group. It'll probably take up most of the meeting to workshop those as a group, and then we would yeah, make them available. And then Kat, we're just getting some cool comments. So Chris is saying, you know, we need to think about tidal swamps as well into some of our diagrams. And so Chris, we would love to have you on our subcommittee meeting. It's been pretty fun if you need another meeting to attend.
Yeah, and that's like been the challenge so far, is to make these applicable to all of our systems, but not too detailed. And so if there's like certain habitats that we feel strongly should be represented in this, then that's definitely feedback we're looking for. So thanks for that, Chris.
Yeah, this, I will just preface that this is definitely a lumping game instead of a splitting game when we go about making these slides, just because we want them general. But we have thought about making, like, you know, it's 5 slides, but then we are going to make some pocket slides that would allow you to like tailor your presentation to be more specific. But right now we're just focusing on those like broad slides for now. Okay. Oh, thanks, Kat. Okay, so now we're gonna move over to Julie's gonna present on the work that's hopefully coming out of the Tiburon workshop. So I am going to stop sharing. And Julie, you should be able to share.
Okay, let me see. Can you see that? Okay.
Yep. And just before you start, I'll just give like a little bit of background. So in the fall of last year, we held a workshop at Tiburon. And the purpose of this workshop was to, and okay, wait, Julie, am I just getting into your presentation?
Do my first slide for me, Jan.
No, you go. I get too excited. You go. I'm done.
Yeah, so as Jan was saying, we held a workshop, which I think several folks here attended, where we gathered stakeholders from throughout California to identify barriers to coordinated monitoring and to develop a pathway towards a statewide estuarine monitoring enterprise. The purpose of this presentation today is to, of course, give you all an update on our progress, and we're also really interested in your feedback and also gauging participation in contributing to the manuscript, just because we had a couple folks reach out to us after the workshop to see if they could be involved in some kind of manuscript or white paper. So yeah, the purpose of the manuscript is we really wanted a record of all of the knowledge that we compiled during the workshop and the ideas we had for paths forward. And we also wanted this information to be out there in case other regions are looking to better collaborate around estuarine monitoring. Yeah, so that's the purpose of it. This is our title that we have so far. It's kind of long, so probably not the final title, but we're thinking to call it a collaborative framework to develop a statewide estuarine monitoring enterprise, engaging multiple stakeholders in a workshop approach. And a couple of the journals we're thinking of submitting to are Ocean and Coastal Management, Journal of Environmental Management, or Ecological Applications. Happy to hear any thoughts on other potential venues for this. So Jan and I have drafted an introduction already, where we focus on the context and talk about how estuarine monitoring is crucial amid the changing environmental dynamics that we're experiencing. Also stressing the need for a shared vision and strategy to tackle monitoring challenges statewide. We also talk about some of the historical barriers to coordinated monitoring. So examining the lack of a statewide monitoring framework in California, and then also citing financial constraints and other challenges, discussing existing efforts and disparate approaches, and how that kind of hinders progress towards a unified strategy. We introduced the workshop as an opportunity to address monitoring needs and also advance a more integrated approach. And we also talk a little bit about how we use the workshop to develop a shared vision for coordinated monitoring. which is basically to establish a comprehensive and integrated estuarine and coastal habitat monitoring program. And also we kind of distilled what that program should or would achieve. So these are the next sections of the manuscript that haven't been written yet. So we'd appreciate feedback on these, or if anyone's particularly excited about contributing to these sections, please let us know. So the second section is the workshop framework. So describing the structure of the workshop itself, how we didn't gather quantitative data, but we have qualitative information from the workshop, and how we used historical insights to inform the framing of the different sections, and also strategies to identify barriers and needs, like a breakout group with targeted questions. Also, so the next section is the workshop outcomes, where we talk about participant demographics, so the different sectors we were able to involve. Also, we're going to present the outputs in this section, where we talk about what barriers and agency needs were identified. So regulatory coordination, things like stable funding, data access and data visualization, long-term sentinel monitoring, and efficient and regular habitat mapping. Also talk about what coordinated monitoring would or should achieve, as I mentioned before, like collaborative networks, and improved accessibility and interpretability of the data, and also a generated roadmap that Jan and Eric produced, showing what those collaborative networks might look like. And we're also hoping to integrate, this was Eric's idea, his contribution. He suggested recently integrating a case study on coordinated monitoring in other locations. So places like Chesapeake and Great Lakes that have really thought about coordinated approaches as well, and lessons learned from other efforts. So for the discussion, we're hoping to do a recap of the things that I just mentioned. So discussing barriers and opportunities, and then weave in lessons learned from the case study and the workshop. Also, kind of highlight what we want to achieve with coordinated monitoring, such as improved science integration, decision-making, coordination, data accessibility, and economic benefits. And finally, we want to conclude with how to get there. So really emphasizing the role of this work group, and also the tangible outputs from the workshop, like the roadmap that I mentioned before. And also stressing the importance of influencing natural resource management entities and policymakers in this effort. So yeah, that's what we're thinking. I'm happy to take any thoughts and questions. I didn't really time this, so I don't know how much time we have, Jan, but yeah, let us know thoughts or questions, also interest in contributing to particular sections. We can talk about it now if we have time, or you can email Jan or I after this.
Yeah, we definitely have time. So if people wanted to add things, Karina, do you want to just say your comment?
Yeah, I'm happy to. I didn't participate in the workshop, so I'm not sure I would be able to help specifically there, but I'd be happy to help in other directions or sections. But I think it'd be good to utilize the case study information and the workshop information to really leverage the recommendations strongly, because I think that could be the template that is applicable at a state level. I think since the CMW and CWMW and others are based loosely, well, strongly, I would say, on the EPA framework, it might be important to kind of cross-reference to that three-tier structure. And then my note in the chat was related to, I don't know if anybody brought this up in the workshop, but incorporating Indigenous and tribal ecology recommendations, or even if it's just a discussion about barriers for inclusion in a framework, then I think that's a really important thing to highlight. And then you mentioned we flipped through it really fast and I was typing, so I didn't see the case study locations. I think you said Great Lakes and somewhere else, so those might be good, I think, contextually to help inform the state framework, but you also might, there's a few good kind of broader regional type studies from California that might be good for California specific lessons learned, since some of our challenges are a little bit different. And I'm sure I have more thoughts, but I'll just stop there. There's some stuff on sort of urbanized systems versus other systems and, wetland archetypes and stuff that I think is kind of like linked into, but I'll just stop there.
Thanks, Karina. Those are all really great suggestions. So yeah, for the barriers to tribal participation, Marissa, are you still on the call? You want to speak to that at all? Like, is that something you might want to write a little something about, or maybe point us in the direction of somebody who can?
Yeah, I don't know if I would be the best person to write about it, but yeah, I can think about who would be better to who would be a better fit to write on it.
Cool.
But yeah, I think that's a good idea, and that also reminds me of like and I think Jan was probably going to talk about this at the kind of wrap up, but that's an idea for like the summer, like the next quarterly meeting is having a more Indigenous focused meeting.
That would be super interesting.
That'd be awesome.
Yeah, we'll talk about it more, but that's what we were thinking. We have a meeting slotted for, I think July. And so I've been liking this. I liked last meeting where we had a real like focus, where it was like North Coast focused. This meeting, I don't know, we're just like, it's like check-in year, and then the next meeting would have another like theme, which could tie into this. But yeah, it looks like we have some questions. Matt?
Hi, thanks. I enjoyed the workshop and I'm interested in some of the suggestions people are making here now. It just occurs to me that it might be advantageous to broaden the scope of the manuscript a little bit. So it's not the title as it's written now, and some of the way the introduction seemed framed from what you presented is focused on that workshop. But I think a lot of the discussions that are happening right now and through into the summer, it sounds like, and maybe even that spreadsheet of all the monitoring programs that you've started compiling and some of the other components that you've been talking about during this Zoom call today are also informing the outcomes of that workshop and building on those. And so it'd be good to think about broadening the scope of the manuscript a little bit to allow for a little bit more maturation of those, fleshing some things out, maybe instead of focus on the workshop, which could obviously be a strong part of how this started, perhaps, or however you want to present it that way. It's this work group could be the focus, or the collaborative group that is involved in the workshop and the other associated efforts could be the focus of sort of the nexus for the manuscript instead of just that workshop in Tiburon. That's just a suggestion. But yeah, I think it's great. It's very exciting to see. Thanks.
Thanks, Matt. Yeah. So I think we're thinking of it more as like the workshop is the method by which you kind of gather the information for that broader scope. But I really like the idea of kind of like shifting the focus to like this work group instead. I really like that. Thanks so much.
And I guess I would just say that it sounds like all the information hasn't been gathered yet. Like a lot of the gathering is happening after the workshop. So that's the point, I guess. Yeah.
Totally.
Right, and the workshop was a real catalyst for this great conversation that we're having here and the future meetings that we've been having. Yeah, go ahead, Nick.
Yeah, maybe just to kind of note on the topic of like speaking to other agencies, use of this type of information. We've been working to kind of wrap up a takeaway document from the workshop that we held back in December for state parks that, you know, a lot of these folks also attended. And so, you know, I'd be happy to kind of help out with this and see if, you know, some of the ways that we're thinking of presenting information from that event are applicable here, since there's obviously a ton of overlap. But, you know, also I imagine that that could be a good data point for, you know, I'm certain that a lot of like our analysis of like the breakout group discussions and stuff like that, we're like, oh, we need consolidated data. We need a centralized landing place for monitoring efforts, right? Like I bet that there's some stuff that we could pull out of that as like a good data point after the workshop, where a lot of the conversations that happened at the workshop were like identified as important by regional managers. And so, you know, I'd be happy to follow up offline about some of that, but you know, reach out if that sounds interesting to you.
Yeah, that's great. Thanks, Nick. That's awesome. I'm writing everyone's names down and I'm gonna send something out after this. So I appreciate all this input.
Yeah, thanks everyone. As another aside, we are thinking about hosting our fall meeting for CEMW again as some type of workshop or in-person meeting. And so I'll probably send out some like a poll or something about if people are interested in that, whether that's in Northern California or Southern California. We would just want to make sure that if we were going to host another in-person meeting / workshop, we would want, again, some tangible output or like some reason why we would coming together. I don't love the idea of us just coming together for just a meeting, but really like workshopping something or working on something. So that's also something that the co-chairs are talking about. Okay, so moving on to our next agenda item. Karina, are you presenting or is Eric presenting? Do you know?
I hope it's not me.
Oh, okay, Eric.
There's
okay,
Eric.
Eric is here. Oh, but Eric says Karina. Oh, okay.
Oh, sorry. I forwarded him the link. I think it was from my registration.
It's all good. It's all good. Okay,
Yeah.
so our next presentation is
Thanks for that, Julie.
Yeah, is on the Los Cerritos Wetland Restoration Project. And so, Eric, you can share your screen.
Anybody see the presentation in presentation mode? Or is it? Oh, let's see. There we go. How we looking?
Looks good.
That's good.
Sounding good? Looking good?
Yes, to both.
Perfect. Great. Thanks everybody for having me. Eric Zahn, Principal Restoration Ecologist with Tidal Influence, and been involved with the Los Cerritos Wetlands conservation effort for about the past 2 decades. Initially as a student, then as a state staffer, and for the past 15 years as an ecological consultant. So happy to present on the Southern Los Cerritos Wetlands Restoration Project today, especially since we're getting closer and closer to actual restoration happening. I'm going to start off talking about some historical ecology. We'll talk about the restoration planning process, and then most excitingly about the next steps. So starting off with the historical ecology, I think we all know about our wetland laws throughout the state, Southern California, and specifically here in San Pedro Bay. We have a beautiful system of tidal estuaries, but about 75% of them have been lost in the past 120 years or so. Focusing down on the system where Los Cerritos Wetlands is located in Alamitos Bay, historically 2,400 acres of coastal wetlands, and now we have about 500 acres or so of restorable area. And of that, let's say about 100 acres are actually somewhat a tidal wetland. Historically, within that 500 acres, 88% would have been vegetated intertidal wetlands, and now about 11% is. So that's really the crux of the issue here, is we've lost these intertidal vegetated wetlands, and that's what we're looking to restore. Love looking at these aerial photos, and I live with a 4-year-old girl, so we also love using glittery colors. So in that glittery circle there, that's generally where the project is. I could identify it because of the black grove of eucalyptus trees that are still there. So it's called Gum Grove Park. And for those that are locals, here's some landmarks. Belmont Shore was just a big salt flat that got filled. CSULB did not exist at the time. Naples was being built, no marine stadium yet. San Gabriel River was flowing freely into the ocean, and Seal Beach was a rough and tumble town at the end of the line. So a lot has changed since then. We use these aerial photos to really understand how this change happened, because it didn't just happen at once. It's been a series of unfortunate calamities of abuse of the land. And so in order to untangle that and figure out how to restore it, it's really helpful to see what got placed where and how things got moved around over time. Which brings us to present time. We are located just south of the LA Orange County border, all within the city of Seal Beach. And it's called the Southern Los Rios Wetlands because it truly is the southernmost 100 acres of this 500-acre complex that straddles the county and city boundaries, as well as the San Gabriel River. So, you know, this is the historic estuary of the San Gabriel River, whether it's called Alamitos Bay, Los Rios Wetlands. That is the main watershed. Looking a little closer at the site, the 103.5 acre site, the 3.5 of it is owned by the State Lands Commission, right on the PCH frontage. The remaining 100 acres is owned by the LCWA. The Los Cerritos Wetlands Authority was formed in 2006 by the City of Seal Beach, City of Long Beach, two state conservancies, Coastal Conservancy and the Rivers and Mountains Conservancy. They all had the shared mission to promote protection, restoration, conservation, and management of Los Rios wetlands, and really created that entity that could lead a slogging, long restoration planning process successfully and continue to acquire the funding necessary to keep it going. So I know this is a monitoring work group, but I do think it's important to spend a little time talking about the planning process that gets to the point where an estuary restoration project can start to be monitored before, during, and after restoration. So this planning started in 2011. So we've been at it for about 15 years. In 2015, a conceptual restoration plan was developed for the entire complex, which then was followed up by program EIR in January of 2021, which begat a habitat restoration plan that same year. And that program EIR is a foundational document. It allows for projects to tier off, so long as that project performs its own analysis and produces its own project level designs, and also performs its own project level CEQA or environmental review. So when we were determining what project would tier off first, the Southern Los Rios Wetlands one lined up for several reasons, and the authority had to determine what's the path for environmental review. And it would, while an addendum to the program EIR would have been acceptable, it wouldn't have been acceptable to our stakeholders. So a full-blown mitigated negative declaration was performed to allow for stakeholder involvement and for them to provide input and ultimately make the project better. And we really needed to do that. We had to assuage some frayed nerves, because the way that we lined up the program EIR was to showcase the potential most impactful ways to restore this landscape, so that we had captured those as project tiered off. They could intend to fall under that umbrella, but it was really hard to convince the public that, oh, don't worry, the real restoration plan will be much more sensitive to the ecological conditions. So for instance, for this project, for the program EIR, we showed a visitor center and analyzed those impacts, moving the road. We showed tidal channels going every which way, big, deep tidal channels, excavating large areas of known contaminants to maximize tidal wetlands, several channels going underneath the road. And, you know, we knew that we had to walk back from some of these things, along with maximizing the footprint of potential flood control facilities. And so as we headed to the project level design process, we did just that. We eliminated the visitor center. We kept the road alignment the same. We eliminated the second channel going underneath the road. Instead of these extra tidal channels, we decided to restore salt pan habitat. We reduced the size of our flood control facilities based on our hydrodynamic modeling. And we said, hey, why would we excavate this big dump of hydrocarbons? We're instead going to use that as a place to put our cut material as fill and restore uplands. So the planning process really has, guided us as we've gone along. And this figure really showcases the basics of what we're trying to do here. This site has been filled, a lot of fill, which has led to it being about 2/3 upland. And that upland is essentially fields of mustard. So we have to work to determine which parts of that upland should be restored to functioning upland and what could be used to create new tidal wetland habitat. We do have existing salt marsh in the green there. It is degraded, heavily muted, but still has some function. So there's areas that we don't want to impact by the restoration that we want to enhance, and there's other areas that we can expand from. So finding that balance of habitat types within all these constraints has been a challenge, but ultimately at this point, we're in about 65% design phase. We've looked to reduce the upland to about 38 acres from 66, still leaving some great upland for high tide refugia right in the middle of the site and then along the edges. And we've been able to maximize the tidal wetlands and other marine-based habitats, salt marsh, unvegetated intertidal mudflats, subtidal, and transitional wetlands and salt pans. So it's been interesting to see this all come together. One of the biggest pieces of it is how we're going to get the tides in there at the levels that we need. And we have to install a bridge on this road. This road cannot go away, unfortunately, right now. So that's probably the biggest lift for the project, is creating a bridge so we can have the right span to get the right amount of tides in to the site. Now, like every good project, it is going to be implemented in phases. The first phase is being implemented just with the existing tidal connection to the San Gabriel River. It's about a 40-inch wide culvert that connects the San Gabriel River, and the hydrodynamic modeling indicates that this can support about 50 acres of the site. So the enhancements in some of the areas that are closer to the tidal connection can be restored initially. The reason that we have to wait is because our ultimate tidal connection is to the Haynes cooling channel, which is just north of the site right here. And that's a full tidal water body. In 2029, they will not be able to perform once through cooling anymore, and they have no use for this tidal channel. So we will be able to access it and bring water into the site. But most importantly, we need that tidal connection so that we can drain the water from the site before the next high tides come. So that's the real challenge with the mutation. The water can come in, but it doesn't go out fast enough. One thing I want to point out is that we have in our plans replicated experimental plots built in. We haven't designed the exact nuances of this, but essentially we want to set up a place where a long-term study can be performed for the impacts of sea level rise on this restoration project, specifically the plant communities over time. We've done pretty much every technical study you could imagine, some of them twice. We have a great understanding of the biological resources. We found a number of special status plants that we may impact and have to mitigate for. We also know there's a variety of animal, mainly bird species, that are special status. Sparrow does have 25 breeding pairs. So that species, we've studied that population for about the last 7 years. We have a really great understanding for where they're located and where we do not want to impact this species. Instead, around the edges, we want to expand this species population by enhancing the salt marsh. The overlay of the cultural and tribal cultural resources is probably just as important as the biological resources for this project. I'll just talk to what I think is the most fascinating part of this effort, and that's the Wetlands Authority pursued a traditional cultural landscape study. So aside from all the other requirements, they went above and beyond. And essentially what the study determined was it's not just the tangible artifacts that may be found that have cultural or tribal cultural significance. The landscape itself is culturally significant and must not be impacted. Geology has been something that we studied. We have a fault line running right through the project site. This is one of the reasons why oil operations are historic and ongoing in the area. And thanks to those oil operations, we have some of their remnant contamination on site. So it adds to another one of our constraints. We've characterized and determined the locations of these, and or have a framework for a plan for how to remediate or deal with each of these different contaminated areas throughout the site. And we've had numerous groups do hydrodynamic modeling for current conditions, flood conditions, future restoration conditions, and that will have to continue through the remaining planning effort. So up to now, this has been a lot of planning that's gone into just this project, and that's all been funded through grants from the Coastal Conservancy, Rivers and Mountains Conservancy, and CDFW, as well as the Small Community Foundation. And we are transitioning into the next phase of planning and project implementation, thanks to a generous grant from the Coastal Conservancy, as well as the Ocean Protection Council. We'll be able to finalize construction documents, finalize permits, do a lot of public engagement, and most exciting part is construct the first phase of this restoration project. Next steps, we got a lot of work to do. So our hope is that permits are approved by the end of this year, and that will line us up so we know what our monitoring program really looks like, and we can start performing our baseline monitoring pre-restoration next year. In May, we hope to have complete designs. We can get on the streets and get contractors lined up so that one of them can help us break ground in September and work for 18 months and finish the first phase of the restoration project by May of 2027, which would then start our post-construction monitoring, which we anticipate being 5 years. And that brings us to this monitoring group. So that was a lot about a restoration project. And we have the luxury right now of two things. We have time to develop our monitoring plan. So Karina, my colleague, will be working with me to develop that ecological monitoring program for this project. And we have the time to work with these regional and statewide groups like yours to determine how consistent we can be, while also making sure that we're monitoring the nuances of this site. The other luxury that we have is this project is not, we're not beholden to any mitigators. So we're not receiving any mitigation funds. So what we are beholden to, which is great, is the project goals and objectives, which are too long to include here. So this is really the framework for everything we're doing, as well as the monitoring program. So there won't be these requirements coming as part of a third-party mitigator. So I want to leave it here with the project goals up, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thanks, Eric. Are there questions? I know a lot of people are on here that are working in the monitoring programs, so yeah.
Eric, I just had a question about the impacts to tribal resources. You were saying that in addition to tangible items, the land itself has to be taken into account. I'm just wondering how that works in a landscape that's so already altered.
Yeah, it has been very interesting to work through that process. So I guess for the first, kind of understanding of how we're doing this, we formed a tribal advisory group. So we got to know everybody pretty well through all of our environmental review processes. And we said, hey, let's get together as a consortium and talk through this. And so we were able to get 5 different tribal groups to join that and provide us with guidance. And so they are essentially expressing their perspectives on what that landscape should look like. And the members of our tribal advisory group all agree that it shouldn't look the way it does now.
Oh, that's good.
And so then it's like, what should it look like? And so they're very engaged in helping us shape what it should look like, while putting in specific features. So we have to actually have a tribal access plan. That's one of our mitigation measures. So we're working with them to determine certain areas for specific functions, so they can utilize the site for their cultural traditions. So they are actually helping us create that landscape. And I think ultimately one of the most important things of saying this is a traditional cultural landscape is any other developments that are proposed out here within these 500 acres have to deal with that document and the fact that, you know, they will not be restoring it to something that looks natural, and they may be putting up a solar array or a gas processing plant or condominiums. So that is the antithesis of what the tribal voices have said that they want on this landscape.
Gotcha. Thank you.
Eric, we're working with the Wetland Recovery Project to develop a regional monitoring program. And Karina's sitting on the SAP for that. But one of our project deliverables for EPA is to demonstrate how a regional monitoring program could play into a case study project. And we had a meeting on Monday, and just so you know, this project came up from both from the commission perspective and conservancy perspective as a project that might be interesting to Nexus as a restoration project, as well as like a more voluntary restoration versus mitigation restoration. So we'll be in touch, but I appreciate you pointing out your project goals and your willingness to work with this group. I think it could be a really exciting partnership.
I love it when my worlds collide. I've actually talked to Eric separately about maybe being like a case study to implement some of the regional monitoring strategies. So I think it would be great to integrate it into that framework and kind of already have, I don't want to say plug and play because we're not that far, but conceptual idea of the right indicators that we can track, and sort of the timing works out nicely for this to kind of be a case study to structure out the monitoring program associated with the WRP. So
yeah, and as I said, we have those two luxuries, that we don't have a third party that is uncertain in what their monitoring requirements will be that we have to deal with. And we have started thinking about this early enough that we can put together a concerted effort with our regional partners. So I think we're some low-hanging fruit for collaboration.
Definitely. Any other questions for Eric? Okay, well, thanks, Eric. We
Wonderful.
appreciate it. And if you're willing to share your slides or a condensed version of what you're able to share, we would love to send those out.
Of course, thank you for having me.
Yeah.
okay. Thanks for highlighting that project, Jan.
Yeah, we are open to, if anyone would like to get on the agenda for any specific project, you can always reach out to the co-chairs. Okay, our next presentation is on providing public comment on estuarine criteria for 30 by 30. And so Joss, you can go ahead and share your screen and introduce yourself.
I've lost my unmute. So let me get this. Okay, we're in. Can you hear me? Oh, good. Okay.
Yeah, you look
good.
Well, thank you so much for having me. I'm Joss Hill. I work at the Pew Charitable Trusts. I'm based in Oakland, California, and we just launched a new strategy, conservation strategy for the US that's 6 years and focused on climate resilience and biodiversity. And so I'm leading our California team. My colleague, Bobby Hayden, is also on the California team here. And so we have an opportunity that we'd like to present to you as a group, just knowing that this is a place of estuary experts and people that really care about the future of these ecosystems in California. So I'm going to just run through a short presentation, a little bit about the Coastal Waters 30 by 30 process, and an opportunity to engage and think about potential spatial management measures that could be leveraged to improve conservation of estuaries and help the state meet their goals. And so we're going to propose and pitch that we establish a sort of smaller work group to coordinate some science-based feedback. So just first, I wanted to set the scene, because I'm not sure if everyone's aware of the process. 30 by 30 started with in 2020 with an executive order, and in 2022 the state released this Pathways to 30 by 30 process, which is like a roadmap about how the state's going to get there, and in that identified what a conserved area is, which is land and coastal border areas which are durably protected and managed to sustain functional ecosystems, both intact and restored, and the diversity of life that they support. And there's 3 key objectives and priorities, which is to protect and restore biodiversity, expand access to nature, and mitigate and build resilience to climate change. And so essentially there are 2 processes. There's a land process and a coastal waters process. And I should add that this the 30 by 30 goal was codified in law last year. And so everything in the Pathways document as a roadmap is kind of codified in law. So we're going to talk about the coastal waters process here. And that's led by the Ocean Protection Council. I should add, just as we start, obviously estuaries are in that interesting land-sea place, and so there's been a line drawn about what is included in this coastal process, and so in coastal waters includes bays, but not coastal wetlands. So there's 4 pathways to achieving the 30 by 30 in 4 coastal waters, and one is adaptively managing the state marine protected area network. So it's been adopted as, you know, this is a conserved area, and so we're 16% of the 30%. The second pathway is strengthening protections in California's national marine sanctuaries. The third, which is what we want to talk about, which is spatial management measures. And the fourth is supporting tribally led conservation. So what is a spatial management measure? Well, roughly it's a management measure that is not the marine protected area network, and it's not a national marine sanctuary, and then also would meet the definition of a conserved area that I showed earlier. And so in the original Pathways document, the language used was an OECM, other effective area-based management measure, and this is a concept used internationally and adopted by the Convention on Biological Diversity. That's just a way for places that have maybe that are managed maybe not primarily for biodiversity, but actually help protect biodiversity, so that they can be included and resources sent to those places. And so as I understand, California's sort of making a slight adjustment to fit in with the other policies of the protected area and national marine sanctuaries that we have. And just to get you a little bit of a flavor about what might be a SMM, this is a list from OPC's website, and it's just a list right now of, this is the initial kind of idea of what might be included, just to give you an idea. And so these include things for water quality protection, fisheries management, habitat and species management, research and restoration, recreation, and military use. So I'm not going to dwell too much here, other than to note that some of those actually arguably overlap with land sea. So I think just highlighting that, as you all know, as estuary people, it's a complex world out there, and trying to figure out this land sea sort of interaction, you know, is just always challenging when you're thinking about management. So the opportunity here is to help the state meet their goals and improve conservation management of estuaries. And so the spatial management process to date kind of started in October last year when OPC put out a public comment asking the public, hey, we've got this list of what we think might be good spatial management measures. Do you have other ideas? In December, they established a technical advisory panel, and they're tasked to draft criteria for evaluating what would fit into a conserved area. So that can then be used to sort of take this list of management measures and say what actually fits this definition of a conserved area. Now, this draft criteria is going to come out in June and for public review. And obviously just announced there's going to be some extensive regional workshops in July, August, and September as an opportunity for feedback on these draft criteria. And so we've been in some conversations with Ricky Erickson from California Marine Sanctuaries Foundation, and we would love to propose convening a working group so that we can provide evidence-based input into the conserved area evaluation comment period. So help us be the best 30 by 30 process that we can. What we're proposing that this group might do, I think, basically once we're formed, we'd like to kind of provide this in a little bit more of a detailed straw person of what we might do. But here's just an example of our thinking to date. That essentially what we want to do is develop evidence-based recommendations on criteria necessary to achieve the 30 by 30 goals for our estuaries, and sort of put the best science and thinking. And it was really great learning about the projects that you were working on earlier, the indicators and what constitutes a healthy estuary. And I think all of that is absolutely be so helpful in this process. And then also for a short list of management measures, start thinking about like how do they meet or fail to meet 30 by 30 criteria so that we can provide this robust input. So activities may include things like what information do we need, what elements are needed in the criteria. So thinking about estuary type, what are the threats and what are the management interventions that can mitigate those threats, and potentially think about some lessons learned from some specific examples of measures, maybe, or maybe even the estuary MPAs or areas of special biological significance or something else. We're proposing getting together, at least once or a few times before the draft criteria come out, just to sort of get our thinking together about what information is needed and what sort of approach, and then a few times after the criteria come out to help consolidate a sort of strong response recommendations. So we're able to put a few resources into this. We've got Rebecca Schwartz-Lesberg on this call today from Coastal Policy Solutions, who's going to help coordinate and sort of lead and develop the recommendations for this group. You can provide some limited stipends to cover time if that's a need. And we also hoping to be able to provide some GIS support as well and sort of figure out what that would need to be and what we're able to do as the group comes together. And so finally, here are just some contact details. So to contact Rebecca for interest in the group, and I've just put mine and my colleague Bobby Hayden's contact information up here as well. And I would just love to hear any thoughts or feedback that you might have, expressions of interest, questions. Thank you.
Thanks, Joss. Do you want to flip back just to the other slide, just so that people can kind of see what you're asking? And then I would open it up to people to ask questions or comments. I'd also, if like, there's also some, if people think about if you would be interested in involvement, or if you think that there are other places that Joss and their team should reach out to. I think that would be helpful as well. Yeah.
Well, Joss, I'd like to continue to be involved, so count me in.
Joss, you might not have
Fantastic.
oh, say that again, Kevin.
Oh, I just said count me in. I'll still be working on the project.
Fantastic.
Yeah, Josh, you might not have the answer for this, but when the draft criteria comes out, and I think I asked you this earlier too, do you think, because this is like an estuaries group, right? That is, and you're specifically seeking some interest in coastal waters, would there be a place to also potentially respond on the other side of things, or make a joint statement or a joint comment that goes to both sides, both land and
land.
coastal waters? Or is it better to focus on one versus the other?
That's a great question, and I think I'll admit I need to get better educated on where the land process is. What I do know is that they've gone through a process of this sort of gap process. Gap 1, Gap 2 were more higher protections, and I think they've kind of taken a look at protected places already on land and figured out what fits into there. And so the next process is, I think, submitting places that you want assessed. So I need to get better educated, but I think you know, acknowledging that a line has to be drawn somewhere, and that's always tricky for the estuaries, these habitats. I think we do want to, as part of the group, think about what the best way to respond is given the connectivity. So I don't have a full answer yet, but I think, yeah, that's something that we will need to do.
Got it. Kevin, do you think that this is something that the CWMW would want to hear about, or
Yeah, I think so.
but hear about it more from the land, right? Like I was thinking about that during this presentation too.
Yes, I think that's a good idea.
Are there other comments or questions? Okay, Joss. Well, I will, if you can share your slides, and I will send them out to the group. Our listserv is fairly large, so we might get some of that. And then I'll make sure to share the right contact information as well with Rebecca for people to reach out to her.
Okay, great. So I was just trying to figure out how to stop sharing.
Sounds good.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks. Okay, so just for the last little bit, I wanted to provide an opportunity for us to share any regional monitoring updates on where people are planning to monitor this coming spring. This could be from a restoration perspective or some of our monitoring program perspectives. I had already asked Kevin if he would share some on this, but if there's anyone else on the call that also might want to share on some of the monitoring that they're doing this spring, that would be great. So I'll let you kick it off, Kevin.
Okay. Thanks, Jan. So yes, the Estuary MPA monitoring program is doing our spring sampling. It's already started, doing 5 on the North Coast, 5 on the Central Coast, and more than that on the South Coast. Jan can tell you how many she's actually doing. So yeah, up at the North Coast, we're doing 10 Mile, Navarro, Big River, Drake's Estero, and Bolinas. And they're out there this week starting. On the Central Coast, we're doing Pajaro, Morocojo Slough, Carmel River Lagoon, Arroyo de la Cruz, and Morro Bay, and then 5 down south. And so I think we're starting around now, and then probably finishing up in mid-May, right, Jan? That's
Yeah,
kind
and
of
what program is this for, Kevin?
Estuary MPA monitoring program.
Trying to just tell us a little bit about that program?
For those of you that don't know, OPC funded the development of the Estuary MPA monitoring program starting back in 2020. We went through our first round of funding and spent a year pulling together a management advisory committee and putting together a suite of protocols for data collection. In 2021, we did data collection testing out in these 15 estuaries. And then in 2022, we wrote up all the results. We are now on our second round of funding. Thank you, OPC. We've did data collection at those 15 sites in fall of last year and spring of this year. We'll be writing up those results by the end of the year, and then we will have another round of funding for another 3 years of data collection. And the idea is we're going to be adding additional sites with the next round of funding. So I'll at least 7 estuaries in each region for a total of 21 estuaries along the coast. And Jan has done a bang up job of expanding the EMPA monitoring network in the Southern California Bight through the Bight 2023-2024 monitoring effort and other monitoring efforts in Southern California and down into Baja. So thank you, Jan.
Yeah. So one of the purposes of why I wanted people to share is so that you could hear where people are going out into the field in case you also have efforts, whether it's a special study or a more long-term effort. So like Kevin said, that's what's going on within the EMPA program. Can give some updates on the South Coast too. So we wrapped up our Bight regional monitoring, which monitored from Point Conception down to the border in the fall, but we have some other projects that are going to be monitoring this spring in Santa Monica Bay. That's with the NEP in Santa Monica Bay. So we're monitoring a lot of the small intermittently closed estuaries. So Malibu Lagoon, Zuma, Big Canyon, Arroyo Sequite. So some of those smaller lagoons we'll be monitoring. And then we also added Bolsa Chica to our EMPA. So we'll be in Bolsa Chica as well. And so with this comes a lot of water and all sorts of different loggers as well. So we can share that as well. Other updates. So I don't know, the songs crew is on here. Are you guys doing any monitoring in the spring? Chris, I know that you've got your stuff going on. If you wanted to give some updates on that. Nick, I don't know if you have any state park stuff that you know that's going on. I'm just calling out people because I know what a lot of you do, but I just think it's useful to share some. And then we'll hop off early too.
So Jan, just to hop in for songs. So we don't do any monitoring until the fall, but we do 9 months of bird monitoring and we do like, our water quality stuff. But in terms of our actual like biological monitoring, we don't do that until fall.
Got it.
But everything else that is typically ongoing during this time of year will be continuing.
And that's at 4 Southern California sites. So that adds some more SoCal sites that are in the mix for monitoring.
Yeah.
Thanks. I see that you turned on your camera, Nick. You got anything?
Yeah, I can cobble something together. So, I can't speak specific to, the on the ground monitoring, but of course, lots of district level work in all of the 150 some state parks affiliated estuaries. I did want to note that the State Parks Oceanography Program has allocated another year for 2024 for ongoing monitoring at Los Penasquitos Lagoon, as well as some comparative studies at Pajaro and Carmel River. We also are kind of kicking off a new-ish project with UC Davis, looking at some water level monitoring in Barbuilt Estuary, Barbuilt estuaries up and down the coast. And so that should be getting kicked off in terms of like sensor implementation and site selection kind of late spring, early summer this year. So excited about that. Also looking at putting some higher resolution monitoring equipment overlooking Aptos Creek up in Santa Cruz. And so that may also go in sometime a little bit later this year.
Cool. Nick, can you drop those names, the site names that you just said in the chat real quick? Just so that we get them. I'm able, Pike's taking notes and I can fill in his holes, but I can't fill in all your holes for the ones that you said because I'm not as familiar with that. And then that work is with John Largier out of UC Davis, right? predominantly?
Yeah, the new project I was discussing is with John Largere. The work at Los Penasquitos and then Carmel and Pajaro is with Dr. Sarah Giddings at Scripps and Dr. Mara Oriskanen at the Naval Postgraduate School. And then some of that monitoring at Seacliff State Beach up in Aptos is a project led by Dr. Adam Young at Scripps, but that Sarah Giddings is kind of the Estuaries collaborator on that project.
Okay, and so we could reach out to Sarah too to fill in some of that list for us as well, the monitoring information.
Yeah.
Great. Chris, you turned your camera on, so you have some updates.
Yeah, not too much, but you did call my name, so I thought I would jump in. We did a lot of work up and down the Pacific coast last summer, including California estuaries. We're looking specifically at old tidal wetland projects that were like 20 to 60 years old. We wanted to kind of ask what we could learn from those. So in California, that included sites in San Francisco Bay, Elkhorn Slough, Carpinteria, and Tijuana Estuary. So this year we'll be writing up results for that, sharing that broadly. So I don't really have much California field work coming up. We're doing additional field monitoring in Oregon estuaries. And we are working on two estuary monitoring plans for both Southern Oregon and the Central Oregon coast. So I heard mention of monitoring plans a few times. So if anyone's interested in sharing drafts, I think it's great if we can kind of standardize approaches up and down the coast wherever that's possible, use the similar methods, and that makes data sharing and data makes data more congruent up and down the coast. So we're happy to share drafts if other people are interested in that too.
Yeah, definitely, Chris. Happy to jump on a call with you too to talk about anything with the EMPA program or any of the stuff we're doing down in SoCal. Cool. Rachel, you turned your camera on. Means you might have some updates.
Yeah, I just wanted to, I'm going to put this in the chat. I'm with this Delta Conservancy, but my colleagues at the Delta Stewardship Council have just put out a cyanobacteria HABs monitoring strategy for the Delta that's available for public comment. So that's not being implemented yet, but if you have expertise on CHABs or like interest in looking at that and providing public comment, if that's one of the things you study, I think they would really appreciate it. And I think that's probably going to get started, no sooner than probably next year.
That's great. Are there any other comments? Marissa, you have anything up in the North Coast?
Yeah, I'll talk about this ocean ranch monitoring that the Wiyot Tribe and CDFW has been doing for over a year now. We began monthly fisheries monitoring in February of 2023, and we have admittedly been a little biased in hoping that we catch Chinook juveniles in our seine halls, and we caught our first one last month. So we were all really happy, and we caught another one this month. Also, we did this massive helicopter wood loading project in the unit, where a nearby property, also CFW property, logged a bunch of Sitka spruce and eucalyptus and Monterey pine, and about 100 of the Sitka spruce logs got helicoptered into the Ocean Ranch Estuary unit just to see how wood functions in the estuary. There's not, maybe folks can chime into this, but upon our quick search of research on how wood functions in estuarine settings, there's not a ton of stuff out there besides some work up in Oregon. I forget which river system. But yeah, so we're starting to do some monitoring of just how these wood structures function in the estuary there. I guess for context, I should mention that this is part of the Eel River Wildlife Area.
Great, thanks. Is there anyone else or comments on any of the projects that people mentioned? Okay, so I just want to end with our future meeting dates. So we've got 2 meetings left that are scheduled through the end of the year. We have Wednesday, June 12th, 1 to 3. And like I mentioned earlier, we're thinking of making this more of a tribal focus. And so we'll be working to, if people have suggestions or recommendations, please reach out to us. We'll be working to put something together. And then come Wednesday, September 11th, we are looking to potentially meet in person and talking more about hosting some type of workshop. So if you had some ideas on that, please let us know as well. But with that, get 20 minutes back in your day. We'll send out notes and slides, but we really appreciate. I'll stick around if anyone has any other comments, but with that, we really appreciate it. Thank you.